아름다운 걸 저 어둠도 불빛도 아닌 우리 때문일까
And also, like, you look at something like what happened with what's her name or her name, Pink Romantics, like how that tweet just blew up completely, and the repercussions that all this Twitter engagement that might seem like so trivial, and when talking about it, it actually is mostly trivial stuff. Like not that specific event, but a lot of it is not that big a deal. And to see it grow and grow and get more body and more substance and then explode into something that has such huge repercussions, and it's kind of unbelievable.
Yeah, I like to think that, once you log off of Twitter, nothing from that matters, but then there are certain things that do end up having real life repercussions. And I think, examples like Pink Romantics is definitely one of them, where, spreading like those types of defamatory rumors and, just trying to do smear campaigns in general, those do end up having like a massive impact, especially with the way the media views BTS and the way the media views armies. And, it does get quite frustrating. And, that's why, I think it's important to sort of combat that. But then at the same time, the line is also quite blurry between like what we should be responding to and what we shouldn't be responding to. And I still do think that we need to have like more talks about how to best deal with more serious cases like that. Because at the moment, like sort of blocking reporting, that's more for like sort of lower level antis who are just like spamming the same things over and over again. Like, oh, BTS can't sing, something like that. Like you can easily block or report that. But like for more serious stuff like that, I think definitely we need to have a regroup and figure out how to best deal with that without causing all this attention that spirals into, what has happened with accounts like Pink Romantics.
I completely agree. I feel like because when something like this happened, people react with such passion that instead of talking about it, talking about the issues and discussing them, we sometimes just tend to shut people out. And I know like when that happened, like my comments were also not the best way that they could have been. And I think like discussing stuff and talking about it among ourselves without the edit, like, yeah, she like this is obviously an anti-attack from the outside, and we'll have more of those coming, especially now we see like these paid accounts that come in to just cause chaos. But sometimes they do bring up stuff that are worth talking about and worth discussing. And if we just immediately go to anger or to shut people out, then that's not a solution. And that just makes everything 10 times worse. And it makes the story bigger. And that what ends up being written later in articles, instead of us just going, let's talk about this. Let's see what the people that it relates to think about. Let's discuss it. That's like, I think when Hobie did Chicken Noodle Soup, that was actually like from what I saw was an actual discussion on it. Like people didn't just immediately go, because you had immediately people say, oh, it's cultural appropriation and about his hair. And in that case, from what I saw people discussing it, whether it was or wasn't, and different point of views from relevant people. Like if I go and say it's not, that's meaningless. It doesn't affect me in any way. So you have to have the point of view from the people that it affects.
Yeah.
And the people that it relates to. You can't just immediately shut those voices out. And I think like recently with Pink Romantics, that's a lot of what we saw. We saw people shut out relevant voices of the conversation. And I think that's not how it should be. Like we should have that calm state of mind, which is very hard, I know, but to give people that platform to talk about it and not say, oh, no, you're wrong, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
I definitely think the worst of it was probably in June, because as you know, Black Lives Matter, that whole situation.
Yeah.
I don't think like my mental health has been affected that the way like in such a way in a while. Cause like I remember, cause at the time I sort of like had gone on a little break from Twitter, just like maybe a day or two before all of this happened.
Yeah.
And then it was because like, I was having like a bit of eye strain and whatever. So I was trying to like cut off social media and trying to like avoid screens for like a week or so to see what happened. And then suddenly, like just to check to see what was going on, to respond to like a few messages on Twitter, maybe, like my timeline refreshes and suddenly I go through it and I was like, oh my gosh, what has happened in like the 24 hours that I was gone? And, at first, like, it was like really stressing me out, but then I was like, okay, wait for a second, don't tweet anything, just don't even announce yourself on the timeline. I just took the time, I stopped and I just read through all the posts. I read through what everyone was saying. I tried to figure out what the problem was. And then I just didn't tweet. I didn't talk over anyone. I was just letting the timeline figure out what the problem was. And I think that a lot of people just want to race to be the first to tweet about an issue to show that they care, that they understand. But then a lot of them are also severely uninformed about those issues as well. So then they might be siding with, people who are just throwing stuff out there rather than taking the time to educate themselves on the topic. Because especially with the sample, a lot of people were actually getting talked over, especially within the Black community. And I thought that that was really, really appalling to see, especially because the same people who claimed that they cared about Black people were the same people who were also talking over them. And, even though I myself, I'm a Black person, I'm not African American, I'm just African. And I thought that it was important that, I just let the African Americans talk amongst themselves because it wasn't entirely my issue to talk on. I think that there's a lot of nuance when it comes to the Black community and like what we should be letting people talk about. And so I think that it's also good to not treat the Black community as a monolith as well, because I think that's what also a lot of people did during that time, because they're like, oh, if one Black person is offended, that means everyone else should be offended, otherwise they're wrong. Or if this Black person isn't offended, then that means everyone else shouldn't be offended, because then that means they're oversensitive. Yeah. So it was like this back and forth where people were trying to figure out which part of Black Twitter am I supposed to side with. And I feel like at that time, if you don't know who to side with, just stay out of it. Let the people decide for themselves what is problematic, what is not problematic, and let's talk about it amongst ourselves. The last thing we need is confused outside voices who are trying to help but kind of not really helping by sort of boosting certain sides and talking about things that they're not fully educated on. I think that was a really big problem that I saw. And I think it's important to not shut out either side, to let them explain what they feel and then come to a solution from there, and let them come to a solution, because there was a lot of white savior complex I also saw there, where I like, oh, I'm just trying to help, POC, they get discriminated and whatever. I'm just using my privilege to help them. We don't need your privilege. We don't need your help with this. Let us figure it out. A lot of people did not want to let us figure it out. And then on top of that, if they did find somebody who was offended, then they were getting angry on that person's behalf and then using that anger against other Black people.
Yeah, it's like their favorite thing.
I really hated.
To get angry on behalf of someone else.
Yeah.
I hate that. Like, when I was in Japan, sometimes when they go to, like in Japan, like people don't wear kimonos regularly. But when they go to temples, or like they do like this whole day of temples and like a photo shoot and all that, then they wear, like they go to these places, they pay between $30 to $100, they get their kimono, they rent a kimono, get their hair done, the whole thing, makeup, like everything. It's super fun. And you go and like spend the day in temples and like taking beautiful pictures and all that. And they love it when tourists do that. They love it. Like every time they see a tourist do that, they get so excited about it. And like, I've never seen, like, and I've talked to them because I was worried myself that it's not, whether it's appropriate or not. And every single person I talked to was so excited that you want to know about the culture, you want to take part of it. It's not, they don't like view it as this higher thing, like holy thing, but as you being invested in their culture and want to take part of it. And I've never met a single person that was like against it. And one time, like this didn't happen for me, but I saw someone post a photo of themselves wearing a kimono, and that person was obviously white. And the backlash that person got from like people that want to fight on behalf of someone else, that have no idea whether they care or not. They just want to show that they're like, oh, look at me, I'm protecting the weak colored people. There's, like you said, like they're having that savior complex. And you saw like all those articles that came out after Black Lives Matter about the K-pop community and the army, and how they and how Black people feel as part of that community. Every single one of those articles was written by a white woman. Like not a single one was written by someone of color. Like, at least do that.
Yeah, it's just very frustrating to see that even when we are like when Black people are the leaders of certain projects within the K-pop community, they're not represented by Black people. I just really get frustrated when I see that. And they have such a problem with giving us credit where it's due, but then they're willing to quote unquote fight for us. Sorry, I think I just activated the voice thing on my phone. I was wondering who was talking for a second. And then, so I remember there was also another issue in terms of that with, I don't know if you saw it, but like a few weeks ago, that whole thing where people were debating on Buddhism and Catholicism and Christianity, and like how apparently like BTS had like disrespected like 3 different religions in one. And I was just sitting there as a Christian, I was sitting there looking at the timeline, and I was like, what on earth is going on? People were trying to tell me that I should be offended that he put a statue of Mary on an altar where it's supposed to be. And I'm like, he didn't do anything with the statue. It just sat there. He didn't use it as a toy. He didn't swing it around. He didn't draw on it. He just put it there. And again, idolatry, that's a thing we're not supposed to do. We don't worship the statue. So essentially he could put it anywhere he wanted. Even if he put it on the floor, that's not wrong. But then the people who are fighting for us, you looked at the accounts and like people are asking them, are you Catholic? Are you Christian? Are you Buddhist? And they're like, no. What?
It's just, I saw that debate and I was like, have you, like, there's a whole era in art that's like basically let's create statues of important and pictures and paintings of important figures in Christianity. And like, where were you then?
Exactly. The whole point was to integrate Christianity into art. That was the whole point of that one period, where you have like a whole, like you go to a museum and there's just a whole room and it's just multiple portraits of like Jesus, of like the Last Supper and things like that. Like that was the whole point. The statues hold no spiritual value because again, that would be idolatry, which we're not supposed to do. And it's crazy to me how even like when even atheists were backing us up, like, have you guys never read the commandments? Like if even atheists are correcting you on your knowledge of religion, like you've done something wrong.
Yeah.
어쩜 이 밤의 표정이 이토록 아름다운 걸